They told him his daughter was a locked room. Then a stranger picked the lock with a rhythm only she could hear. Rain lashed against the panoramic glass of the penthouse, turning the city below into a bleeding watercolor of neon and shadow. Inside, the silence was a tomb. It was a silence Julian Hart had curated, a vast, expensive void meant to swallow his grief. But tonight, the silence was broken, not by the storm, but by a sound that didn't belong, a dull, frantic thumping that pulsed through the marble floors like a dying heartbeat. Leona heard it as she wiped down the kitchen island, her mother's janitorial keys heavy in her pocket. This wasn't the clean, precise noise of the composer's legendary piano. This was the sound of something breaking. She followed the discordant pulse down a hallway, her sneakers silent on the cold stone. The sound led to a single door, heavier than the others, designed to be soundproof. Yet, the agony within was so palpable it seeped through the cracks. Her mother's warning echoed in her head. Stay away from the studio. Mr. Hart values his privacy above all else. But the human sound of that distress was a magnet. She cracked the door open. The air inside was still and cold. And in the center of the room, dwarfed by a grand piano that gleamed like a black coffin, was a small girl, Iris. Her small fists were not playing the piano. They were assaulting it, pounding the keys in a violent, silent tantrum of frustration. Her face was a mask of tearless anguish, her small body trembling with the effort of making a noise she could not hear, of expressing a feeling that had no outlet. This was the composer's daughter, the mute child hidden away in a fortress of soundproof glass. Leona should have retreated. This was a private sorrow, a sacred disaster. But she saw herself in that raw, unfiltered frustration, the feeling of being unheard, of being a ghost in a world that moved too fast. She didn't step into the room. She slid into it, lowering herself to sit cross-legged on the floor just inside the doorway. She didn't look at Iris. Instead, she focused on the floor and she began to tap. She matched the child's chaotic rhythm, her knuckles rapping a soft, sympathetic echo on the polished wood. Thump, 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 thump. She wasn't trying to calm her. She was answering her. I hear you. For a full minute, nothing changed. The girl continued her frantic pounding, a silent scream in a silent room. But then, a shift, a slight hesitation in the child's hands. The pounding lost its fury, becoming more deliberate, more rhythmic. Leona mirrored the change, her own tap softening, becoming a conversation. The girl's head tilted, her eyes, wide and dark, flicking from the piano keys to the strange girl on the floor. The storm of her movement stilled, replaced by a single, questioning tap on one key. Leona answered with a single, matching tap on the floor. A question, an answer. In the heart of a silent penthouse, a bridge made of rhythm was being built, one fragile beat at a time. The experts used charts and sign language. She used a heartbeat. Iris's hands, which had been clenched into furious little hammers, slowly uncurled. The violent pounding ceased entirely, replaced by a single, inquisitive press of a low C sharp. The note hung in the air, a lone giant in the quiet room. Leona responded not with another tap, but by shifting her position. She patted the space on the floor, directly in front of her, an open invitation. She held her breath. This was the moment the spell would break, the moment the child would retreat back into her impenetrable shell. But Iris slid off the piano bench. Her small feet padded silently across the floor until she stood before Leona, her gaze intense, studying the stranger's face as if reading a new language. Leona smiled, a slow, easy gesture that held no pity, only a shared secret. She placed her own hands flat on the floor, palms down. Then she began a simple, primal rhythm. It wasn't complex. It was the rhythm of a heartbeat. Ba-bump, ba-bump, pause, ba-bump, bump, bump. She varied the pattern, adding a syncopated slap on her thigh, creating a tiny percussive symphony with just her hands and the floor. Iris watched, mesmerized. Slowly, tentatively, the little girl copied her. She slapped her own small hands against her knees, mimicking the pattern with an uncanny precision. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a spark of life igniting in her eyes that had been absent moments before. This wasn't therapy. This was a game. They built a call and response, a rhythmic dialogue that needed no words. Leona would create a pattern, tap, tap, slap, and Iris would echo it back, her accuracy stunning. Then, Iris would venture her own clumsy pattern, and Leona would repeat it, validating her, telling her without words that her creation mattered. The child's face, once a canvas of anguish, now glowed with the fierce joy of understanding. A sound escaped her, not a word, but a soft, breathy exhalation, a laugh that was all air and no voice. It was the most beautiful music Leona had ever heard. The sterile, silent studio was no longer a prison. It was a playground, and in the center of it, two strangers were building a kingdom out of rhythm, a place where silence was not a sentence, but a space waiting to be filled. He built walls to keep the world out. He never expected it to get in through the floor. The door to the studio flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. Julian Hart stood silhouetted in the doorway, his tall frame vibrating with a rage as thunderous as the storm outside. The silence of his home was a sanctuary, his last vestige of control after the universe had stolen his wife and his daughter's voice. The faint, percussive sounds he'd heard from his study were a violation. What is the meaning of this? His voice boomed, cutting to the rhythmic spell Leona and Iris had woven. Who let you in here? Leona froze, her hand still hovering above the floor. The magic shattered, replaced by a cold dread. Iris flinched, her small body curling in on itself, the light in her eyes snuffing out as quickly as it had appeared. She retreated behind the piano bench, a ghost once more. Julian stormed into the room, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The janitor's girl on his pristine studio floor, his daughter looking more present than he had seen her in months. The contradiction disoriented him, fueling his anger. "Get out!" he snarled at Leona, his finger pointing toward the door. "You have no right to be in here. You will leave this apartment immediately, and I will be speaking with your mother." Leona rose to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't drop her gaze. She was upset, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She was pounding the piano. "I was just answering her." "Answering her?" Julian scoffed, the words dripping with contempt. "With what? This noise? This isn't music. This is clutter." He looked at his daughter, who was now staring at the floor, her hands clutched tightly together. The sight of her retreat was a familiar pain, a confirmation of her brokenness. But then he truly saw her. He saw the faint, lingering flush of engagement on her cheeks, the way her shoulders weren't slumped in total defeat, but held a residue of their recent activity. The furious pounding he had heard earlier was gone. In its place was a calm, if frightened, stillness. The anger in him faltered, replaced by a confusing, unwelcome ache of hope. The expert child psychologists, the speech therapists with their degrees and charts, they had never gotten this close. They had never made her play. He was still furious. His territory had been breached, but the evidence before him was undeniable. The lock on his daughter's room had, for the first time, been jimmied open. He composed for kings. She composed for a child who couldn't hear. Her music was louder. The confrontation left a fragile truce in its wake. Julian did not fire Leona's mother. Instead, he did something that shocked himself. He offered Leona a job, not as a cleaner, as a companion. "You seem to have a rapport with her," he said, the words tasting foreign. His arrogance, a fortress in itself, was at war with his desperation. He was a master of symphonic structure, of complex harmonies that filled concert halls. Yet he was being schooled in communication by a girl who spoke in knocks and hand claps. The next day, Leona returned. She brought no tools, no flashcards. She brought a small box of dried beans and an empty glass jar. She sat with Iris in the sunlit living room, ignoring the grand piano, and showed her how to pour the beans into the jar. The sound was a soft, rattling whisper. Iris's eyes lit up. She took the jar, shaking it, entranced by the texture of the sound. Leona then produced 2 wooden spoons. She tapped them together, then on the marble floor, then on the glass table, creating a spectrum of tones. Click, clack, ping. Julian watched from the doorway, hidden, his composer's mind deconstructing the simple sounds with critics' disdain. It was primitive, unrefined, But then he saw Iris pick up a spoon and tap it against Leona's, a deliberate, joyful clack. Leona began to hum a simple, wordless melody, matching the rhythm of their spoon taps. It was a folk tune, something raw and untrained. And Iris, who had never responded to most carefully composed lullabies, began to sway. She couldn't hear the melody, but she could feel the vibration on the floor, could see the expression on Leona's face, and could match the rhythmic pulse of it with her spoon. A profound shift occurred in Julian. It wasn't gratitude yet. It was a seismic crack in his understanding. He had been trying to give his daughter a language she could not learn. Leona was speaking to her in a language she already knew, the language of vibration, of pulse, of rhythm, the very foundation of all music. His own compositions felt suddenly sterile, intellectual exercises that had forgotten the primal heart that made music matter. This girl, with her beans and her spoons, was a more authentic musician than he had been in years. She wasn't teaching his daughter how to talk. She was teaching her how to sing without a voice. The silence was broken not by a piano, but by the sound of two hearts beating in time. The penthouse began to breathe. The oppressive silence that had clung to glass walls like frost began to thaw, replaced by a new, vibrant soundscape. It was the sound of life. The rhythmic shush-shush of a broom became a waltz. The clatter of dishes being put away became a staccato percussion piece. Leona and Iris moved through the rooms as conductors of an invisible orchestra, turning the mundane into music. One afternoon, Julian found himself not hiding in his study, but standing by the grand piano, his fingers resting on the dust-covered keys. He hadn't touched them since his wife died. The instrument was a monument to his loss. But now, he heard Leona and Iris in the next room, creating a complex, interlocking rhythm with their hands and feet. It was intricate, playful, and full of a joy his music had long forgotten. Hesitantly, he pressed a single key, matching the root note of their invisible chord. The sound of the piano, once a trigger for grief, now felt like a tentative question. He played another note, then a simple chord progression, weaving it around the rhythm they were creating. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing with them. Leona heard it and, without missing a beat, adapted her rhythm, accentuating the downbeats of his chords. Iris, feeling the new, deeper vibrations through the floor, laughed her silent laugh and stomped her feet in a triumphant finale. Julian looked at his daughter. She was looking at him, not through him, her eyes bright and focused. In that moment, he wasn't a grieving widower or a failed father. He was a musician in a band, and she was his drummer. The dam inside him broke. Melodies, not of sorrow but of long-forgotten hope, began to stir in his mind. He didn't rush to write them down. He simply let them flow, improvising alongside the living, breathing music of his daughter and the girl who had saved them. The once silent penthouse was now a crucible of creation, filled not with finished symphony, but with the glorious, messy, and beautiful sound of connection. She didn't teach them how to play. She taught them how to hear the music they'd forgotten how to make. Weeks later, the storm had passed, both outside and within. The city below glittered, serene and clean. Inside the penthouse, the air was warm, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the dinner they had all shared. Leona was preparing to leave. Her time as a companion was coming to a natural end. Iris was different now. The silent, frustrated ghost was gone, replaced by a vibrant, communicative child who expressed the universe, a feeling through the rhythm of her movements and the light in her eyes. At the door, Julian stood with Iris at his side. He didn't offer her money. That would have been a desecration of what she had given them. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you." 2 words that carried the weight of a rescued life. Maybe 2. Leona smiled, looking down at Iris. "You were always in there," she said softly. "You just needed someone to find your frequency." She knelt down and tapped a final, gentle rhythm on the floor, a secret code they shared. "Goodbye. For now." Iris responded by placing her small hand over Leona's heart, feeling its steady, reliable beat. As the elevator doors closed, Julian looked at his daughter, then back at the now quiet studio. He finally understood. Leona's mastery was not in rhythm itself, but in listening. She had heard the music in Iris's silence, the desperate rhythm in her pounding fists. She had heard the grief in Julian's sterile control. and she had taught them to listen to each other. She had taught Julian that his daughter's world was not silent, but was in fact built of a different kind of sound, a world of vibration and pulse that was, in its own way, more pure and more musical than any he could notate. He took Iris's hand, and they walked back into the heart of their home, a home that was no longer a museum of silence, but a living instrument. The healing wasn't in finding a cure for muteness. It was in discovering that they had never needed one to begin with. They just needed to learn how to listen. And in the quiet of the night, if you pressed your ear to the floor of the penthouse, you could still hear the echo of the rhythm that had saved them. A faint, happy tattoo. The sound of heart once broken, now beating in perfect time.